Hello, dear friends, and welcome to episode 24 of Fantasy for Our Time. It's been a few weeks since I've shared any new episodes. The last few weeks have been an opportunity for me to share some episodes of live streams I did in the last few years. Part of that is because it's summer. It was an opportunity for me to go and do some things that I'll be talking about in a second. And part of it is just because there were some really important things that I said in years past that are relevant to the subject of fantasy, especially fantasy for our time. So I really wanted to get as much of that information out there for you as possible, so you really understood where I stand, where I come from, and my approach to storytelling, especially in that fantasy and sci-fi genre that we love so very much. This will especially become obvious when I announce with great pleasure that the next few episodes, although no longer weekly, will be about the Rings of Power. So we're moving to a twice-a-month format. This will allow me more time to prepare better and to create and craft a better product for you all. And it will also give me the opportunity to put as much energy as possible into all the things that I'm doing, some of which includes actually writing fantasy, which in the presence of too much work sometimes goes by the wayside. So I'm happy to announce, as I mentioned, that starting with episode 24, this episode, every 2 weeks for the next, for the foreseeable future until the first season of Rings of Power is done, I will be alternating co-hosts to have long, involved conversations about the episodes that we've seen of this very interesting and very relevant show, relevant for the purposes of this podcast, of course. But before we get there, I wanted to start a new mini segment for this podcast. We're going to be dividing it into several new segments, hopefully that you will find interesting. And the first is what I like to call vignettes from a writer's life, basically a personal update. So these past few weeks have been very rich for me personally as a writer. For those who don't know and who primarily have come to me because of what I have to say about other writers, you may be interested to know that I'm not merely a writer of fantasy, but I also do a little bit of teaching of other writers. I am in no way, shape, or form, of course, an expert. I'm in the early period of my career as a writer. That being said, there are some principles and some things that I've gathered over the past 5-6 years in terms of how to write fiction that I have found to be in short supply in other places. So it was partially that, but it was partially the opportunity to work with such wonderful people as Jonathan Pageau and Paul Kingsnorth that allowed me the opportunity to start a new online writing school, a year-long program called the St. Basil School of Creative Writing that is now opened under the aegis of St. Athanasius Academy online. And we just had, it's a year-long program with a regular admission college-style admission process with an application process and all that. And the first cohort is 11 students, and they've just started their first year with an in-person live retreat in the Adirondack Mountains, led by yours truly. So that was an absolutely lovely opportunity to sit and be and work and talk with a group of not beginners, but at least intermediate level writers, all of whom have some understanding of the basics of how to write fiction, and some of whom have already published, and all of whom have an incredible desire to learn and to become better at that craft that we all love so much, the craft of writing stories. So that was 1 week of this past month that was very wonderfully spent. Immediately after that, even a writer needs some vacation time, especially when vacation time is difficult to get. We creatives who have the opportunity to make our own schedule tend to overload that schedule rather than to do the proper intelligent thing and do less than what we're supposed to. But no, be that as it may, there you go. So to have an opportunity actually to be with my wife and my 4 children on a beach for an entire week was not merely wonderful for the relaxation, but there's something I wanted to say about it that I hope you will appreciate, and that's that in this in this world of ours where we are so constantly inundated with information, with moving images on screens, with the noise of the news cycle, there's something truly amazing and full and whole and beautiful about being completely attentive to one thing for a long period of time, especially when that one thing is not you. I didn't know what a week at the beach with 4 children and my wife would be like. And initially, I'll be honest, my fears were that it would be a very tiring kind of vacation, something that would be a vacation more for the children and less of a vacation for me and my wife. But you know what happened? It was something amazing. The opportunity to allow my attention and my energy to be completely directed at my children was something that actually gave me energy. There's amazing wholeness and amazing fullness in being completely attentive to things that are outside yourselves, especially when those things happen to be human beings with fully formed characters, or rather, fully being formed characters. And I have to say, putting away my phone, not reading while on the beach, not worrying about work, not writing, not doing anything other than being involved in the lives of the children as they were on the beach playing, there was not a single moment of boredom. It was truly amazing. And it filled me up. It filled up the creative well. It filled up the energy well. And I'm ready to move on into September, which I always see as the beginning of the year. Not really because I'm a teacher at a institution of higher learning, but just because there's something about the beginning of the year in September that makes sense to me. Other than those two things, coming up in the near future, I have an adventure race that I'm going to be participating in, the Venture Quest adventure race in Maryland, in Germantown, Maryland. Those of you who don't know this about me, I regularly train for adventure racing, which is a endurance sport similar to triathlon. That's usually the way that most people describe it. But instead of swimming, you're usually in some sort of watercraft, be it a canoe or a kayak. But it's a multi-sport race. And the primary difference, of course, between it and a triathlon type races is that you get a map, and there is no set course. There is no pre-planned. Well, there is a pre-planned course, but it's not marked out for you. You have to find it with a map and with a compass. So it's a sport in which your mind is constantly thinking, in which you are navigating as you race, and it is absolutely fantastic and wonderful. And I've spoken about here and in other places the wonderful exhilaration of being out in nature at all times of the year, from the heat of summer to the absolute coldest days of winter, and the opportunity it gives me as a writer to actually experience the world in a way that I hope will fill out my writing, especially my fantasy writing, to give it a rooted kind of reality, something that Tolkien did so well, even though, as far as I understand, he never was somebody who went out on quests, though he was very connected to the natural world around him. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about in my personal update is that I have a new novella available. This is the first long work of fiction that I've done in almost 2 years. It's called The Son of the Deathless. It is a free ebook download that you can get on my website. All you have to do is go to nicholaskotar.com and sign up for my newsletter, and you will get it automatically. It is in my Raven Sun universe. In terms of the timeline, it occurs about 1,000 years after the events of the Raven Sun series. But that being said, you do not need to have read the Raven Sun series to enjoy The Son of the Deathless. It is a complete story in and of itself. Those who have read the Raven Sun series will appreciate some Easter egg type things that happen, but it is a complete story that that I have had confirmed by people who have not read the Raven Sun series, that it does work, even if you have not read the rest of my work. And I hope it will be a useful and interesting entry point for those who are interested in my fantasy world. And if you don't mind, I'm going to now read the back cover blurb. Maybe it'll make you interested enough to go and check it out. So here it is. The dead will rise. The living will fall. the deathless will reign. Born on the vernal equinox, his first breath drawn while he lay on blood-soaked soil in the mystic woods of Dunai, Andri's birth portended heroism, power, destiny. And yet, other than an unusual affinity for the land, the boy has lived a life indistinguishable from that of any other child born in Dunai. A life of secluded, prosperous, boring contentment. But when two soldiers arrive, fleeing the never-ending wars of an evil empress, everything changes. Andri's home has at last been found by the Empire, and the Empress demands her due, Dunai's crops and food to feed her subjects, its men and women to fight her wars. Worst of all, the Empress has the Mother of Kish, a sorceress whose thirst for blood and power knows no bounds, to oversee Dunai's conquest. But the Mother of Kish has her own dark designs, for she has heard the rumors. She has divined the signs. She knows that the treasure of Dunai lies not in its crops or its people, but in the power it hides, the power to raise the dead, to create an eternal army capable of laying waste to all who stand against her. And the Mother of Kish will have that power, or she will destroy it, along with all Dunai, unless Andri can discover the truth of his birth, the lie of his life, unless he can find within himself the power that creation bent itself to give him as the son of the deathless. Hopefully that was interesting and exciting to you. Go and check it out. The Son of the Deathless is available for free to all subscribers at nicholaskotar.com. And now on to our conversation with Richard Rohlin about the Rings of Power. Welcome, and hello to Richard Rohlin. Richard, you and I have spoken before, but never on this podcast. So for the purposes of the Fantasy for Our Time, would you please explain to us why you are the sub-creator extraordinaire that everybody on this podcast needs to know about?
Well, I don't know that I'm the sub-creator extraordinaire, but I'm doing some things that I'm really excited about. So I think most of you know, I'm the co-host of the Amansul podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. Also have another podcast that'll be coming out in the next week or two, hopefully, called Rude Screen, the story of early English Christianity, which is about the Anglo-Saxon conversion and the Gregorian mission to the British Isles. So that's going to be really fun. What's that?
Fantastic, I said. Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And then I do a lot of writing, and specifically I do. Hold on, I should have been ready with this.
Richard is always prepared.
Really, what it is I don't like promoting myself, and so I'm always like caught off guard, like, oh, talk about my thing. So I recently published this book called Akborida. It's actually Akborida, to which is appended the Songs of the Seven Cities, translated into the English by Richard W. Rohlin.
Right.
And this is a book of mythopoeic fiction. It's actually kind of an anthology. So I mean, as you can see, it's kind of a slim volume. It's an anthology. It has prose stories with accompanying textual criticism apparatus, which is what everyone wants in their fantasy.
Yes,
and then also
footnotes, baby.
Footnotes, baby. There's also quite a nice little selection of poetry in here. Basically, you could say I would describe the whole project as an exercise in liturgical world building. Like if you were going to world build, instead of, some people start from a place of language or economics, or just shamelessly ripping off the War of the Roses or something like this. But
yes, we're not going to talk about that though.
But basically for me, it started out trying to answer the question, what does it mean to be a culture? What does it mean to have a people? This as a sort of a third culture kid myself, and not really feeling like I had a bracket that I fit into. And so that's what this project started as about 20 years ago. And this is the first fruits in terms of publishing. There's a lot more to come. So this book is actually sold out now, which was really cool. We sold out our first.
Yeah.
So we sold out our first print run, which was amazing. It was a small print run, but still I wasn't expecting it to
Just like in
sell
the
out
first
in
5 minutes, right? I mean,
2.5 days. But yeah, like it was kind of insane. It was kind of insane. So we're doing a second print run, which will also be larger. So hopefully this won't happen again.
you better,
That
because
will
I didn't
be
have a chance to buy anything. It's
it's
lame.
already been ordered, and it'll probably be up on the store in October. That's from darklybrightpress.com, which is
And
a
they're
cool
great people, by
site.
the way. Yeah, they're
Super
wonderful.
cool people. It's run by Christopher Tompkins, who's like the world's foremost expert in English ghost stories. In fact, he was
I did not
passing
know that.
through Dallas. Yeah, he was passing through Dallas the other day, and so I made him come over, and we got a bunch of people over, and it was a small group, but we got some people over, and we had like pipes and scotch, and we sat around a bonfire, and Christopher just read ghost stories to us for about
Oh,
two
that's
hours.
awesome. Oh
It
my
was a
gosh.
it was a really grand night. So
Oh,
anyway, so
fantastic.
he owns the press, and he likes to collect really cool literary ephemera. In fact, last year at the Inklings Oktoberfest in Wichita, which I'll be at again this year, that's at 8th Day Institute in Wichita, Kansas. That's weekend of October the 22nd, I think. If people want to come out and hang out and
Mhm.
see me, it's going to be a really fun time. I lead a walking tour where we talk about the Inklings while we drink beer at all the different breweries in Wichita. So like if that sounds like your thing, like
So the
walk.
walking tour is all about the beer, not about the Inklings.
Well, yeah, I mean it's we have like themed toasts and stuff, but then like we
Okay, well that's
stop
good.
and yeah, anyway, it's a lot of fun. And anyway, but he and I met. I'm a rambling person, as you're now learning. He and I
I
met
know this
there,
well. No, never
yeah,
mind.
originally last October at the Inklings Oktoberfest, and he showed me like he has a bunch of things like Arthur Macken's original notes on Charles Williams's The War in Heaven, where like
Cool.
he goes through it and critiques like uh he he goes through it and critiques like the and here's where the Latin is very bad, and in fact Charles Williams's Latin is very bad, and things like this. And
That's awesome.
so he's a collector of literary ephemera, and then he likes to publish kind of weird and rare things, and so that's how we got to do this project together. And it was a big hit, so we're going to do another project, a bigger project next year, probably springish, is maybe spring or summer.
Cool.
So look for that. And then the other thing that's related to this, and unfortunately it's not far enough along to be like officially I can announce it,
Ah,
but I will just say there's a really cool tabletop role-playing project
ah.
also related to this that has been in development for a really long time, and it seems like we might actually be close to revealing that to the world. So
Well,
I can't talk about that yet because we're still kind of
well,
dotting the i's and
you're
crossing the
gonna come
t's.
back here sometime soon, so you'll probably have
Yeah,
a chance to
yeah, I
announce it
should be able to maybe have
to
something to say
listeners.
about it then. So I've got some cool
Awesome.
things coming if you like weird fantasy.
Which, of course, we all do here.
Which is me. Yeah.
We're,
Yes.
after all, reading Mervyn Peake for our book club,
Mm.
so we are, yeah, definitely on the weird side. Okay, so the reason I brought Richard along is not only to hear him uh, talk longly about things, but it's specifically for him to talk longly about the Rings of Power. So I've been very careful to keep my own opinions about the Rings of Power, absent from any sort of social media. I've only shared a few things with family members, so nobody really knows what I think, even though there have been conversations on social media that assume that I'm going to tear this thing down and burn it and dance upon its ashes, which is an incorrect assumption.
No
I
matter
will
what your
have you know.
opinion is, we are prepared to cancel you for it.
Well, of course, I'm ready for that, and
Yeah.
luckily,
Okay.
it
Okay.
doesn't matter, so it's fine. Okay, so since I haven't talked about it at all, I'm going to start, Richard, with talking about a little bit of what I liked about the show so far, and then I will allow you to tell me how I am entirely and utterly wrong. So, what I liked. Okay, well, maybe I should first. Yeah, I'm going to start with something else. I'm going to start about how I was approach this thing. So I saw the last trailer. I watched all the trailers. I'm a trailer crazy person. Like back when in 2001, do you remember that when the first information came out about Lord of the Rings or the Fellowship of the Ring? They had the first teaser trailer where they had I mean, it was hardly anything. It was like a shot of Legolas like spinning knives in Helm's Deep, even though this Helm's Deep is in movie 2. It was just like really, really rough cut footage. Uh, Nobody had ever seen anything like it. And it took literally 4.5 hours to download the stupid thing because they didn't have streaming back then. So you had to download the file, the QuickTime file, to watch the very first trailer for Lord of the Rings. So I'm in that camp. Like, I was sitting in front of a computer in a cafe in San Francisco, waiting for the darn thing to download so that I could see it and cry at the experience of watching this first version of it on a screen. So that's me. So I was watching all the trailers for this particular iteration of Tolkien-ish with great pleasure. And then the third trailer came out while I was in the Adirondacks leading a writer's retreat. And since I was leading a writer's retreat, I was very my ear was attuned to common mistakes in writing and common negative tropes in fantasy writing. And I swear, I watched this thing. Every single line in the episode was like, "That is the worst line ever." And then there was the next one. I was like, "Oh no, that's the worst line ever." And then there was the next scene. I was like, "No, wait, that's the worst line ever." And it was just like, it was a collection of the worst written lines of dialogue that I've ever heard. So I was like, "That's it. This thing is going to be garbage." And that's what I'm entering. This is my thought. And plus, I'm, on my YouTube keeps sending me stupid recommendations. And on that recommendation list is the guy from Nerdrotic, is the Critical Drinker, is Ben Shapiro, just because I happen to click one or two things. And these guys have been, I mean, they have not been nice. Yes. They have not been nice. They have been eviscerating this thing without even watching it.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is the tenor with which I am entering this. And I start watching it and I'm like, this is going to be bad. This is going to be bad. Wait a minute. Halfway through the first episode, I'm like, the Harfoots, I feel like I should be hating them. And I'm not. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of liking this. And I'm not generally a fan of diverse casting. I understand the reason they're giving it. I'm not satisfied by it. But within the first 10 minutes, I'm not paying attention to it anymore. It's not jumping out at me. Unlike, by the way, Wheel of Time, where the casting in Wheel of Time does jump out at me and it really bugs me. But I think it's because they're bad actors, not because they're diverse.
That side note.
Yes.
I could not make it more than 2 episodes through the new Wheel of Time show.
Oh, wow.
And it was simply because the acting was so bad.
Yeah, it was really bad.
I was I eventually I was just like, you know what? This is just, it's not. And I didn't like how they sort of artificially grew the characters up.
No, it made no sense.
And I was just like, okay, this isn't what I got on board for. Yeah.
No,
the
exactly.
acting was real bad.
It was bad. The story was bad. They cut out the good stuff. They added new stuff that was stupid. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So Nori and the Stranger surprised me. I actually enjoyed it. I found their interaction to be realistic, heartfelt, and I was moved by it in some points. The visuals truly are amazing. And they, about halfway through the first episode, it started to get to me. Like, unwillingly, I started to kind of really wonder, where is this going? So in terms of the emotional hook, in terms of what a TV series is supposed to do, it did something enough for me to turn my brain off and actually go with it and say, I'm not turning it off in the middle of the first episode, which I was surprised, because I was watching it at 11:30 at night by myself, without anybody around me, with every reason to turn it off and go to bed, because my kids were going to wake me up at 6 a.m. the next morning. So, I mean, you can't, this is a good thing if a show can keep your interest that long. So that's the way I'm entering it. I'm not entering it with any sort of super negativity. I think I'm open-minded enough to let it do its thing. Like I said, the visuals, the care that they're putting into the details, I like. And there's a good reason for that. One of the people who was involved in the production design is Orthodox. So and she does some incredible work, and the stuff that she has done, I'm on board with. I love it. Some of the things, of course, I don't, but there's enough to keep me going, at least for now. So I'll stop there and I'll let you eviscerate my commentary.
I mean, no, I think that was all pretty fair. we'll talk about the things that I don't like and the things that I think are just like extremely dumb.
Yes.
But what I mean, sort of my like high level take on all of that is that what surprised me is that the parts of the show that I like the most are not the parts of the show I was expecting to have any investment in at
Yep.
all. Which is probably why it's a little easier for me to just like sit back and enjoy them.
Yeah.
The thing with the stranger is a very interesting enigma,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm deathly afraid it's Gandalf.
Me too.
All signs,
I am
all
so mad. I
signs,
would be so mad if it's Gandalf. I
all
would be so
signs
mad.
point to it being Gandalf. However, the actor who plays that character has basically made some comments to the effect of, "You'll never guess who this actually is." And so,
Okay.
what that makes me feel like is that the Gandalfian notes, you could
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
the
Which are very obvious. Yes. Yes.
talking
Yes.
to bugs,
Yes.
and yeah, John, Blue Wizard is actually that's my personal
I
theory,
hope
and that's
I
what
hope
I'm
it's
hoping. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. I talked about this a little more on the episode of Amazul that's coming out tomorrow with Father Anthony Cook. But I really hope it's a Blue Wizard. I'd be on board with that.
Yeah, me
There's
too.
like a good like precedent for that in Tolkien's writings. I hope it's not Gandalf, simply because we know when and where and how Gandalf comes to Middle Earth, and there's not like
Yeah.
a lot of variation there. And
And there's no reason for him to come into this story. I mean, this is a story of Numenor.
right, yeah,
Gandalf and Numenor.
right,
No, no, go away. Just leave. No.
yeah. A Saruman bait and switch is like something I've thought about as well. That would be super interesting. But again, way too early for that character to come in. Not that maybe the showrunners care about that, but anyway.
Yeah, well, we'll
So
talk about that
I
more.
I'm quite intrigued by the Stranger Thing. I really did enjoy the Harfoots in the first and second episodes. They are now starting to wear a little thin
Yes,
for me.
agreed. Yeah, episode
There's
3 was not good for the Harfoots. Yeah,
there's a sort of like a how do I explain this? It's like a Wicker Man. Have you seen the
yes,
Wicker Man? There's like a Wicker Man went to Pottery Barn kind of
yes,
vibe
yes,
going
yes.
on that is like it's just like a little
It's
like,
dumb.
I get what you're doing. I
No,
get
no,
what
it's
you're
dumb.
doing. And but also like you need to like I just like sober it up just like a little bit, But anyway,
Yeah,
and
we'll
then
talk about that more in a bit.
the other story that I've been actually pretty intrigued by is the for the life of me, I cannot. Arondir, is that his name?
Arondir, yeah,
Arondir. Who like his whole story, like now again, this is something that's it's not in the Legendarium in
yeah,
terms of there used to be like an elven host guarding Mordor, and
yeah.
then they left, and then Sauron came in and took over Mordor. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't like and that's I mean that is kind of a let's say uh, uh a symptom of the collapsing of distance, which is one of the things I really want to talk about
Yes,
that
yes,
bothers me in the show, the collapsing
yeah.
of distance and time. But all that said, we know that at some point Mordor was just like a normal place,
Mm-hmm.
and then Sauron sort of terraformed it.
Yeah,
And so that's an
and
interesting,
anti-terraformed it.
right? Anti-terraformed it, right? And so and so now we're seeing like it's like a well, how might that have happened, right? That's the story we're
Yeah,
getting there. And I think that's actually pretty interesting.
I agree. I like it.
So
I'm
those
enjoying that part. Yeah.
yes, so those are the parts of the show that I'm the most interested in. Stuff that I'm like a little more frustrated about. The whole Galadriel thing, like
Well, okay.
if you want me to
Let's
rant,
shelve
yeah,
Galadriel for a second.
okay. So that
We'll
and then
talk more about her in a bit.
like the Elrond and the Elven Smiths kind of a thing. Obviously, we didn't. I don't think we got anything about that in episode 3,
We didn't. We didn't see him
but
at
that's
all. Yeah.
obviously going to be really important. The show is called The Rings of Power, so
Yeah.
I am quite interested to see where that goes.
I liked that scene between Celebrimbor and Elrond. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I mostly liked it. I had like some little not even like irritations, but just like, oh, but I wish they had said this.
Yes.
Like when Celebrimbor is like, oh, the hammer of Theodore.
Yeah.
He could have been like, oh, my grandfather's hammer. Like that,
Right.
there's some missed opportunities, but I think they
I
don't.
wonder if they can't. I wonder if they simply can't. I wonder that
I
that's
mean,
one of
they
the
can
things that they weren't allowed to include because they don't have the
no,
rights to the first
that's
stage.
in the appendices. That's in the
Yeah.
appendices.
Is it?
Like, and
Okay.
so this is the thing. Maybe we could bracket or not bracket, but like maybe I could just say something about like how I approach critiquing the show.
Yeah.
And then
Go
we can
ahead.
just get into things.
Yeah. Sure.
So the two things that I don't like, and I've ranted about both of these at length on Amon Soul. The two things that I don't like as far as like approaches for critiquing a thing in general or an adaptation of Tolkien specifically.
Yeah.
I don't like when somebody says, "Oh, well, Tolkien, you made up something new that wasn't in the books."
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
making up new things that aren't in the books is fine if it's compatible with the overall ethos and the story, and it kind of helps us right into some gaps. Tom Shippey talks about in a lot of his lectures and his writing on Tolkien, he talks about how Tolkien wrote into the gaps of basically the whole kind of Iron Age northern northwestern European world. He wrote into the gaps, and basically that's how he, obviously inverted some things, subverted some things, and that's how he makes his Middle Earth. And so I think that writing into the gaps of Tolkien is a perfectly valid approach to adaptation. So I'm not at all bothered by that.
Agreed.
The second thing that I don't like, though, is when somebody says, I'll say, well, they did this thing, and this is kind of different from what they had in. This is different from how Tolkien wrote it, and I like the way Tolkien wrote it better. And you're trying to have this conversation, and then somebody says, well, but in the Amazon, but you have to think of this as like a separate world. Like this is the Amazon version of the multiverse, and that's not how they did it.
There is no Tolkien multiverse. Stop it. It can't. It will not exist. Just shut it down. There's even a New York Times article about this. The New York Times published an article about how there should not be a cinematic multiverse.
And that was written by Michael Drought, who's somebody I know, and one of the great sort of Tolkien scholars of our time. And actually the guy who developed most of the lore for Lord of the Rings Online. Which is like a big MMO. So he is like a really established and very credible adapter of Tolkien's work to other media. And so I think that his critique, for me, it holds a lot of weight. But all that to say, he was actually my Anglo-Saxon professor at one point. So, cool. But all of this to say, when somebody says something like, "Oh, well, this is just Amazon's version, and so you have to accept it for that, and you can't use the books to critique it." To me, that's a non-argument. If I say they shouldn't have done it this way, and you say, well, they did it this way, then so you like, that's a non-argument at that point. Like, so the question would be, if we see a place where we've diverged from the source material, which is obviously very important to us, otherwise we wouldn't be here having this conversation. If we see somewhere where that someone has diverge from the source material, then we need to ask the question, why does it diverge? What purpose does the divergence serve? And then ultimately, do we think that's an improvement?
Is
it
a good thing?
And we should just be able to have that conversation.
Of course.
And the fact that either way, like, that there are people who are like in very extreme positions and are unwilling to have that conversation has been probably the most frustrating thing about all of this. But that's not us. So we don't have to be frustrated.
We can do that as much as you like
right now. Yeah. So I don't know where you want to go from here. Do you want to I did kind of talk about in the hot take episode that Father Andrew and I did, I talked about what I meant by, like, my hot take was I asked an AI to write a Tolkien story, and this is what it gave me. Do you want me to talk about that?
Well, I want you to qualify that, and I want you to tell us if you still think that's the case after having watched 3 episodes of it.
I still feel like that's the case. And what I mean by that, like, it's not intended just to be like a cruel put down or something like that. So I've been playing around with this Midjourney app, which everyone's been using on, I think everyone by now knows what it is. And it's like a little it's like a Discord bot you can talk to, and you can basically tell it, give me a picture of something, and then an AI goes out online and it searches for those things and it tries to put them together into a picture, and then you tell it if you like it or not. So I've been playing with it. I was mainly using it to make art for D&D characters, which is, what else would I use it for?
Right. Have you seen the one with Jordan Peterson fighting lobsters?
No,
it's
I'll have to look for that.
It's horrifying.
I'll have to look for that. But I mean, it's quite an impressive tool, actually, and it gets better every single day, which is always the sort of like the scary thing about AI. Is the sort of logarithmic way that it grows and learns. But it's been but I think it's a neat tool. But whenever you generate an image, I can tell it like, give me a painting in the style of John Singer Sargent or something like this, right? And if you stand back, or you're looking at kind of like a thumbnail sized image on your screen, or like your phone, that looks like a John Singer Sargent painting. But then if you actually open it up in full resolution and you zoom in, what you will find is that there's a certain lacking of depth, a certain lack of depth. And then also some of the details are just like a little bit off. Like I could see what you were going for here, but you're not supposed to have an eye right there, buddy. Like those kinds of things, right? And so this is my this is kind of how I feel about the Rings of Power show.
So do you think of that in terms of the writing, the plotting, the characters, like what everything's together? Like,
so I think of it specifically in terms of the dialogue.
Yeah.
And then and then I would say like the how do I say this? The elements that are being brought together for the story. So like, let's say like if I wanted to make a tag cloud of a Tolkien book, like if I took Lord of the Rings and put it in like a tag cloud generator, like a word cloud generator, right? Certain words would come up a lot more than others. And actually lots of people have done very exhaustive studies about this, like lexomic analysis of Tolkien's works and stuff like this. You can go out and read these studies, and what you'll find is, the light, shadow, tree, these words, like they come up over and over again for Tolkien. And so I sort of like, there are a lot of parts of the way that the show is written that feels to me like they were like, okay, what's in a Tolkien story? Well, you got to have trees. Trees are important.
Okay, so
you got to have light.
That scene with Arondir and the tree in episode 3 is a very good example of this, right? Because it's a very strange scene, because he's supposed to be doing something that, in terms of the drama of the episode, he's either going to do something horrible for the benefit of everybody else, or he's going to sacrifice himself in some way, right? This is what the scene demands. And he comes up, and there's this moving, quite beautiful, actually, if you take it outside of the context of the larger thing. Just kind of look at the man and tree. He has this conversation with the tree, and he begins to chop it down. There's a scene like this, by the way, in my first novel. That's one of the reasons why it struck me, because in my first novel, that scene is supposed to be a shocking scene. You're not expecting the main character to do that, and it has a very direct bearing on the larger plot. It doesn't in this story. It's just this moment. It's like this appearance of tree important, elf like tree. Elf has to kill tree. Elf feels bad about tree. Let's move on. It's really weird.
Yeah, and what I will say is that scene, of all the things in episode 3, that was the episode that the part that made me feel the most, or like I cared the most about it. I was like, oh man, I see what they're doing here. This is like,
yes, again and again. This is
like a real bummer of a moment.
I have this thought, I know what they're trying to do. And it's very rare, though, that I'm actually going from that thought process. I know what they're trying to do, to actually being in the moment, to actually feeling what they're trying to do, instead of recognizing as a writer, this is what they're trying to make me feel. I'm not actually feeling it a lot of the times. Sometimes I am, but a lot of times I'm not.
In this last episode, there was a lot of, oh, this is in slow motion now, I'm supposed to feel something.
Well, especially with Galadriel on the horse. Galadriel is, she has the smile, and you're like, is she gonna bite me? I don't understand. Like,
it's a scary smile. It's a scary smile. I did love like her dress and the horse and all that. But her smile was like scaring me a little bit.
I mean, if they didn't have her close up to her face, that scene would have been more effective. Because as soon as she said, "Did you say riding?" Like, and the music swelled up. I'm like, okay, this I recognize. This is classic Peter Jackson. I like this. And then we saw her face, and I'm like, okay, impression ruined. It was really bad.
And so there's just a lot of things where it's like you have all the elements of a Tolkien story, including the visual beauty. I mean, the show is gorgeous. It's way more beautiful than the Jackson films in many places. Maybe not the scenery. I think that the way, especially in the Two Towers, the Rohan scene, that the way that they implored the landscape is still, I mean, that shot of Eowyn like standing at the on the steps of Meduseld. I almost said Hera. Standing on the steps of Meduseld as the three runners are coming up, and like it's playing the Rohan theme, and the wind is blowing, and to me, Oh
Yes,
my gosh.
yes, yes.
I mean, that moment is like, for me, I was pretty young when the films came out. I'd read the books before, but that moment for me was like, I fell in love with Eowyn. I was just like,
Hmm. Hmm.
oh,
Yes.
it was
And there's a lot of
so,
those, and there's a lot of those moments in the Peter Jackson. Not a lot.
yeah,
There's more
yeah,
of them
there
in this
are.
one for sure.
Yeah, there are. So, but even like the deep visual beauty, like I mean,
Yeah.
everything in this is beautiful. I love all the costuming.
Yeah.
Some of the elf haircuts do not
Okay. Yes, I agree.
do
But
not do it for
I've
me.
just chosen to ignore it.
But
I've just chosen to ignore it.
I mean, the costuming is amazing. The color scheme is beautiful. It's not all blue and orange, which is what everything is now.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm very like, so it's like a really rich visual feast. But then when you start, yeah, Scott, the music is underwhelming. The soundtrack
It's
was like,
it's not what's his name? It's not Howard Shore. He only
yeah,
did the opening credits. And I will
yeah,
tell you, I watched the credits. I never watched credits. For this show, I watched the credits, and it's for the
yeah,
music because the
yeah,
music is so different than the actual
yeah,
show. Yeah, Bear McCreary, but Scott, that's right. Yeah, but it's
yeah.
not
I
the
don't
same.
even actually notice the music in the show at all, which is not a
Nope.
good sign. Not a
Nope.
good sign. It's impossible to beat how good
Yeah.
the interweaving of, like, just in the Fellowship of the Ring. If you just look at the
Yes.
interweaving of the Fellowship theme with the interweaving of the Shire theme, and the way that one flows into another, and then they flow back into each other
Well,
later.
okay, so Howard Shore's talent is for leitmotif. He's a Wagnerian.
Yes,
He's a Wagnerian
yes,
in his compositional style. And
yes,
for the Lord of the Rings, and particularly for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, that worked extremely well.
yes,
Bear McCreary, I don't know what he is, but he's
yeah, yeah.
not the same thing.
Yeah,
It's just
it's
not.
definitely not on the same level, which is, yeah, which is, so all that to say, I find it, if I sort of stand back and I squint and I look at the whole show in kind of a
Mhm.
thumbnail, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a Tolkien story. But then when I start to go deep on it, I'm like, well, this has the same relation to a Tolkien story that like an AI rendering of a John Singer Sargent painting has to a John Singer Sargent painting, right?
So
Which is,
I definitely agree with you with that on the first two episodes, but I actually felt that the third episode started to bring elements together a little bit better, and I think at that by the point of episode two, I just decided that I was going to allow this thing to play out the way it wanted to, and Father Andrew and I did a an in-depth analysis of the Akalabeth for Amansula a
yeah,
while
yeah,
back,
yeah,
and part of what we did was we kind of sent a letter to the Amazon, an audio letter to the Amazon
yeah. I
creators
remember
saying,
that.
yeah, what we would like to see, and it's clear that our vision and the Akalabeth's vision of the Fall of Numenor is not going to be in this show. It's
Right,
just not.
right.
It's a different Numenor. It's and the visual cues are also different. I never thought of Numenor as ancient Greece, but this is definitely more ancient Greece or ancient Rome
With a
than
like little Babylon in there too, like
there is Babylon.
at
I
one
saw a
point,
few of the hats. I
which
saw a
is,
few of the
yeah,
hats. Yeah.
which is actually on point for how
Yes.
Tolkien envisioned Numenor. So,
Well, it's the
um,
water. It makes
yeah,
sense that
yeah,
it being an island thing. I
yeah.
agree, but the Roman things are very heavy to me. They're heavier to me than Babylon. And in the choice to have a queen regent, I don't like it. I'm not. I just don't think it's a good idea. I think I understand why they put her in. And it's not the reason that most people think. It's not. This is not a let's put down men thing, because the Queen Regent is not a positive character, guys. I don't know if I don't know if you're paying attention. She's definitely an anti-faithful character. Like, she's
Which
going to
is,
make some really stupid mistakes, and I think Farazan's going to depose her. I think that's what's going to happen. So
well,
Farazan's the real bad guy, but I don't think she's a good guy.
yeah. In the lore, it's is like Pharazôn sort of like forces his way, seizes the kingship,
Yeah.
and because partly because the only heir is a woman, and so he's able to kind of like put himself over, and no one's really able to stop him. So yeah, they've definitely they've changed some of the timeline of things happening in Numenor, which is a bummer. um uh, the I really liked the visuals of Numenor, although what really it really bugged me how short so many of the Numenorians were.
Oh, that's an
um
interesting point. Yeah, of course.
like I and I know that there are people listening to this who are gonna be like, oh, that's a unimportant quibble or whatever, but like one of
Yeah,
the things that's
these are special
constantly,
men. Yeah.
one of the things is yeah, they're not just men, they're like a race of men that have literally been elevated by the gods. And
Yeah.
in in Tolkien's writings, Numenorians consider 6'4" to be man high.
That's right.
In other words, That's your average height for a
That's
man.
5'8"
Right,
in
that's
our reckoning.
6'4", which is how tall I am, by the way.
Yeah.
Is there 5'8", right?
Yeah.
And actually, one of the really important things to know about Galadriel is that she is man high. She's 6'4", right? Which she's almost as tall, or she's almost as tall as Aragorn, who's like 6'6" or something like this.
Right.
She's really tall.
He wasn't that tall in the movies either.
She's really tall,
fair.
and in her younger days, we'll talk more about her characterization a little bit. In her younger days, she is an Amazon. Now, these aren't supposed to be her younger days in the Second Age, but in her younger days, she is an Amazon. She's very tall. She loves to ride, which I did think, that's one of the things that we know about her. When she was in Valinor, she loved to ride. And so I thought that was like a nice little nod to that in episode 3. So I really like Numenor. I realized that it might have been difficult to cast a whole bunch of tall people, but it seems like they could have just gone to Finland from like my recent
they
experience.
were in New Zealand. That's kind of hard.
I know. But I mean, I know it's difficult to like cast a lot of tall people, but listen, if you can make John Rhys Davies look shorter than Orlando Bloom, you could make a bunch of people look tall on a screen for like 2 or 3 scenes.
But again, this is, in terms of the attention to detail, they're putting their attention to detail to other things. I think they're not. So if you've ever seen the calls for casting for the original, for the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, they were extremely specific. And, and there was no talk of this sort of diverse stuff. It was extremely, extremely narrow. I mean, it wasn't just like offensive to people of certain types of color. It was offensive to everybody who didn't fit within, a certain inch range. I mean, it was so specific. Clearly, they're not putting their energy into that in this series. The energy is going into the CGI. That's where they're putting all of their attention. And it
probably
shows.
most of their money too. Probably most of their money.
For sure. For sure. And it does show.
So but that said, I liked the visuals of Numenor. The actual portrayal of the Numenorians I felt was like was fine. It was fine. Like I mean, I get that Numenor's fallen pretty far by this point. Now that I've kind of like accepted, we're in the 4th millennium of the Second Age already. Okay.
Yes.
Like, so
Except
once I
not.
sort of like except not. So once I sort of like accept that, then it's like, okay, well, I mean, I guess it wasn't their behavior that kind of threw me off. It was just like I think that they could have been like more elevated and also more evil all at the same time. Like they felt here's this really bland. Cool. Yeah, that's what it was. I was like, listen, if you had like the highest elevated, human race that's ever existed, elevated by the gods, given the land of the star, and now they're evil, man, they could be like, I mean, they could still like
people. They probably will get to that point.
They'll probably get to that point. But the portrayals, the characterizations felt a little bland. And this brings me to, obviously made me happy to see Elendil. I wasn't expecting to see him.
Yeah.
But once I got over that, it was cool to see him. Isildur. I hope that we're gonna have a Isildur goes and fights off the guards and takes a sapling of the white tree moment, because that's one of my favorite moments in the Legendarium, and it would just be incredibly dope to see it on the screen. We're bringing back dope, by the way.
I'm okay with that.
But this brings me to the thing like, and I know we're a little off the outline here, but I'm just going to go here.
Go.
The writing in the show, like the actual writing of the dialogue, is often bad.
It's
and it is occasionally dumb.
Yeah, so for sure.
Dumb moments, for instance, when so you have Isildur and he's out doing like Numenorian SEAL Team 6 kind of training, which is cool, and there's like no reason they wouldn't have something like that. They do have like a mariners sort of guild or league or something that's really powerful in Numenor, and it seems like Isildur is trying to join that. So cool, I'm down, I'm there. And then they come back, and the last thing they do before they go away for the day is they turn to the sea and they say, "The sea is always right."
That was so dumb. That was so stupid.
And I was like, they did it the first time, and I was like, okay, well, that's a little dumb, but maybe. But then they kept repeating it, and it was like just a thing that all these characters would say, "The sea is always right." And I mean, that's like Oh man,
Okay. So you're just begging for us to go into the section where we're
okay,
supposed to talk about rituals
yeah. So
and
let's
the
talk about
inability.
this.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Okay. So this is what I think. And okay. So you and Father Andrew talked a little bit about the scene of them returning to Valinor, and we don't need to talk about being deported to Valinor. You guys have talked enough about it. It is super dumb. We're just gonna pretend it never happened. Okay, and all the stuff with her in the ocean. Literally, I skipped. I just didn't watch it. It was so boring. I just
And
skipped
like it it's
okay,
so
but
tedious. Anyway, okay,
it's
yes.
idiotic. I saw on a stupid Facebook feed somewhere that somebody compared it to Elwing jumping into the ocean. I'm like, are you a freaking idiot? No, it's not even close to what Elwing does. What is wrong with you? It's not even in the same universe. Okay, we'll leave that aside for a second. So the thing about them standing and being disrobed and starting to sing with the Song of Valinor was supposed to be beautiful. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, here it comes. I'm going to love this. And as it's happening, I'm like, I feel slightly weird. Like there's something a little bit off about this whole thing. And I'm trying to figure I'm trying to understand what is it? What is it? Is it just because we're supposed to see it from the perspective of Galadriel? Is it a point of view thing? And then it struck me, these guys, all of them, are standing on a small boat that is the size of all of them standing together in two lines. There's nothing on this boat except all of them standing in two lines and a bunch of attendants taking stuff off of them. It makes no actual sense in any. Nobody would ever do this. There's no possible way that you could propel this boat. What were they doing the entire time? Standing in place and waiting for the
Yes.
light to shine on them?
Well,
So
listen,
what?
the
So
the
wait,
sea
there's one point that I need to make before you say it. Okay, hold on. I know the Sundering Seas are huge. I understand. We're gonna get there.
no, the Sundering Seas are apparently very small now, so you
They're
wouldn't need a
tiny.
lot in
Okay.
the way of provisions. You could just swim them. It's not a big deal.
Okay, so that aside, that's just stupid. I understand, but this problem also existed in Game of Thrones. This is a problem with visual media. It's very difficult to show long distances, which is one of the, as you mentioned, one of the great things that Peter Jackson did with all the aerial shots. My issue is this: it's not just that it's stupid, which it is. The issue is this: there's a sense that from the writers that if we include ritual, that's going to be in and of itself enough to suggest transcendence, right? Okay, we've
Yeah.
put in ritual, we've done our work.
Right.
The thing is, ritual without real world application is LARPing. It's pretending. It's fake. It's not real. Real ritual is extremely rooted. It's extremely rooted in symbolism, and the symbolism is rooted in real life application of movement and thing and the combination of the two. So
Yes.
worship is never abstracted from everyday reality, from you walking from one place to another because it's convenient to walk from one place to another, and raising up that simple move of walking from one place to another to a transcendent level requires you to start at understanding why you're walking from one place to another, so that you can layer on top of that the meaning that then makes it symbolically important and eventually transcendent. All of the ritual here is completely devoid of real world application. It's just ritual for ritual's sake. And it's really unfortunate. And it suggests to me, unfortunately, that the authors really don't know what true ritual is. I don't know who they are in terms of their religious affiliation. I don't know if they are religiously affiliated or. It seems to me like they're really trying very hard to set up a place for providence in this world. Like, not fate, not a deterministic force, not the universe, but something greater. And there's that line that Galadriel gives to Halbrand that really over the top, like smacks you on the nose with it. It makes it's very obvious, and it's painfully obvious, but they can't do it. They're not capable. They don't have the real world knowledge of understanding of what ritual actually means. And that's really sad. It's really sad.
And again, there are directions they could have gone here. I mean, for instance, we know that the Numenorians actually have a ritual before setting out to sea.
Yeah.
Right. The placing of the green bough, the offering to was it Uinen? I'm probably getting her name wrong. Scott can tell me in the chat. But she's like the spouse of Ose, who's like the lord of like
the lesser water god.
lesser Ainur of like the coastal waters, right, and storms and things like this. And so like they always make a an offering to his spouse to sort of like propitiate him, like give them favorable sailing and things like this. And
Which
it's
would require
actually
you to have a proper understanding of the relationship between man and wife, by
right.
the way, which is another complicated
Well,
one.
yeah.
We'll get there. We'll get there later.
Yeah. Uinen. Yeah, okay, I did remember it. And and of course, like it's a the Númenóreans have fallen in the Akalabath, for instance. The Númenóreans have fallen when they don't make the offering,
That's
when
right.
they set out for the Undying Lands,
Yeah.
and so it's so like if I wanted, instead of the sea is always right,
Which is
like
idiotic.
the Númenóreans don't believe in the sea as an abstract thing.
No.
That's there's like personal entities associated with the sea for them that they could have called upon. And even if somebody wants to make an argument, which I'm also not a big fan of, that's not in what they have the rights to, because I've seen that argument very inconsistently applied, including to things that are actually in the appendices, so they should be able to do them.
Right.
But also
they had
like
the two trees, for goodness sake. And the point is that they could ask for specific rights for specific things if it was necessary for the story, and they would have gotten it.
And even if they couldn't use Uinen's name by name, they could have just said something about the Lady of the Sea. Like they could have, and then that would have been like an interesting world building kind of a moment for the audience, because they would have been like, oh, there's a Lady of the Sea, there's a ritual here, like maybe they I don't know, like they just like some kind of an offering of like veneration or
that you mentioned, right? So this thing about world building is best done, especially in our time, not by long descriptive conversations about stuff, but by implication, by seeing people in action.
Yes.
This is especially this is actually very difficult to do in written form, because in written form it's much easier to do the info dump, right? A little trick for authors. In visual media, it's not hard. It's not hard to suggest things because it's all right in front of you. So I don't understand why the writers keep giving us tidbits about the world building that aren't suggested. They're just telling us stuff.
Right.
It's annoying. Like we've been conditioned by modern fantasy, by the entire publishing industry, to understand as readers, as an audience, that the writer should never, ever, it's the cardinal sin of fantasy world building, you should never tell.
You should always show.
You should always show. And the fact that they're not doing it in a visual medium is very strange to me. I just don't understand. Like, are these writers not competent? I don't get it.
So this is the thing. This is the thing to me, is that there seems to be like a lot of lack of trust between the writers and the audience. And so, in other words, like the audience feel like, okay, if we let people know that Fëanor is Celebrimbor's grandfather, or if we let the audience know that when Gil-galad is like, hey, have you ever heard of Celebrimbor? And Elrond's like, oh yes, the greatest of Elven smiths, of course I've heard of him. Like that's a perfect example of the telling instead of showing. Like, but also notice Elrond didn't say, oh yes, his uncle kidnapped me and we lived in the woods together for a long time, that Celebrimbor, and like his dad killed my uncle, and like that Celebrimbor. And again, like maybe some of this is like they don't have rights or whatever, but there's not a trust. They don't trust the idea that the audience could hold these little extra bits of things just in their minds.
It's really annoying. It's very annoying, especially since right at the same time as this is happening, and this is extremely disappointing to me, is that, and I'm with a very careful eye and with a lot of filters, I'm actually also watching The House of the Dragon at the same time. Okay. And I've been astounded at the world building of House of the Dragon. There are things in there that are so good. So there's this, I don't want to talk about this a lot because it's not about that show, but there's this thing where the members of the small council can only be recognized and be heard if they bring a little stone ball and put it onto their place at the table, and they can't speak until they put it there. There is no explanation given to this thing, but anybody who understands anything about anything can appreciate that this is a symbolic gesture, probably whose meaning has been lost to antiquity, but you understand the importance of it. Because if you're not there and your ball isn't there, you cannot speak. You are voiceless. That is such a powerful gesture. And so that's one thing. Another thing is that it's very clearly a riff on ancient Rome, Like
Right. Yeah.
there. I don't know if you noticed this. If you watched, I don't know if you did or not, but I don't recommend it. It's quite awful in some places. But
Did I watch Ancient Rome? Is that your
no, no,
question?
no, no. House of the Dragon.
Oh, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. There are murals on the walls that are you never have close-ups of. They
Yeah.
are straight up erotic murals. All right. And the one of these erotic murals is the backdrop to the birth scene. And the birth scene is a cesarean section. It's a very violent, brutal cesarean section. And right behind it, you have this absurd erotic mural that would have been very much at home in any ancient Roman place.
Well, the
There's
Romans
never
really did consider a cesarean section to be a cut above natural childbirth. So,
well, okay, well, there you go, right? So nobody talks about a cut above. Sorry, okay, gosh,
there
that
it
took
is.
me a second there. Ouch!
There it is.
Boom! All right, I was on a
Sorry.
roll there.
Sorry.
Sorry, you just been called a dork by somebody in the comment section. But my point is that the writers are intelligent enough in the Game of Thrones universe to put these details in, understanding that the viewer is going to understand the conflict between natural childbirth, beginning of scene, erotic mural, end of scene, ends in violence. It's
right.
It's not beautiful, it's horrifying, but it's
right.
absolutely brilliant when it comes to world building. And instead, we have Harfoots walking around with wicker baskets on their head saying, never get off the road because the road will kill you. Or so I don't even remember because it was so stupid.
It's like,
and they repeated it like 55 times.
We never leave the trail and no one walks alone or whatever, right? So they're doing this. I mean, so this brings us like, this is kind of the next ritual. And again, it felt very like I get what they're I know what they're trying to do here.
Yes.
Like I know the vibe of what they're trying to do, but something about it felt so trite. Maybe it's just the fact that the language, I mean, this has been the case, I've talked about this, but a lot of the dialogue for me just isn't beautiful. It's just not beautiful.
So it's like what I wrote in my very first novel when I was 18. That's the level, right?
Yeah,
it's how I imagined as a child important people spoke to each other.
Right. Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And yeah, so this I get what they're trying.
I'm not interrupting you, but to be fair, I thought episode 3 was better written in general. But carry
on.
Except for the rituals, the 2 rituals.
Except for those two things. I can't remember any other dialogue that just struck me as incredibly dumb.
There you go.
Other than those two, other than those two rituals. I did think that. I mean, we should probably talk about Galadriel and Halbrand and like Galadriel in general. What's going on here? Because this is this is the thing that is like my deepest frustration about the show. And it's really a frustration that's born out of love. Because I love Galadriel as a character. I think she's one of the greatest characters in Legendarium, and Tolkien knew it. She comes in late in the Legendarium. I think there's textual evidence to suggest, if you look at the history of Middle Earth and whatnot, that Tolkien had no plans for a character like Galadriel until he was literally writing the chapter where the Fellowship comes to Lothlorien, and that she just inserts herself into the story. That's awesome. And then Tolkien goes back and has to figure out, well, where does she fit in all my First Age stuff that I've been working on since I was a teenager?
And by the way, just for the writers in the audience, that's the sign that this is a really good character, when the character comes to you.
Yes, on her own. You have to trust that. You have to trust that. Yeah. And so Galadriel just came into the story, and Tolkien knew that she was important. And so what's really interesting, I stayed up way too late the other night, going back through Book of Unfinished Tales, the nature of Middle Earth, and things like this, because I was trying to look at what are the different timelines that Tolkien worked out for Galadriel. And because one of the things that people have been saying is, well, Tolkien never nailed down Tolkien changed his mind a lot on some of these things, which is not something you would know unless you had access to his notes and things anyway, but never mind that. All authors change their minds on lots of things. That's not an argument to say you can do whatever you want, but people will say Tolkien changed his mind on this a lot of times, and so you should be able to, so we can kind of like reinterpret it. And so so here's the thing: when I see that an author has revised something several times, what is interesting about that revision history to me is not, well, I guess I can just imagine the character however I want now, but it's rather to say, what did they change and why? And what didn't they change? This is hugely important if you're doing any kind of like longitudinal study of an author, is to say,
Mhm.
what did they not change, right? And
Yeah.
so I was going back and looking at this to try to say, and I did a post on Facebook about this, people can go read it if they want to, but I was trying to say, what are the sort of the binding elements that for Tolkien constituted the core of Galadriel's character.
Mhm.
Okay. One of the things that so just so people know, basically Tolkien has Galadriel meeting Celeborn, who is her husband, has him meeting them meeting. Most of the time they meet in Doriath after Galadriel comes not to Middle Earth but to Beleriand, but that's like another
Yeah.
little side rant, which is
Yes.
like there's no Beleriand at all. Even when they show the map of when
Yeah.
the elves came to Middle Earth to fight Morgoth, it's just the map of like Western Middle Earth after Beleriand fell into the sea. So it's like not only are they
They don't have
collapsing,
rights to that. They don't have rights to that.
they don't have rights to the map of Numenor either, but
That's
they
right.
used it. So
Yes.
yeah. But I mean, this is that, you know, that they didn't just collapse the whole second age, they've actually also collapsed most of the first. So she
Mhm.
meets her husband Celeborn either when she comes to Beleriand and goes to Doriath, or like up to like 6 weeks before he died, Tolkien was working on the story where they had actually met in Valinor and they came over together. So that's actually the final version, but the other version is the version that, like, you could say it has a little more standing, and it's the version that made it into the published Silmarillion.
Mhm.
And so they meet, and then Tolkien says multiple times, enough that I will sort of accept this as canon, that they don't actually marry while they're in Doriath. They're in love,
Mhm.
but they don't marry. And
Okay.
there's about from when Galadriel comes to Middle Earth until the end of the first age, it's about 550 or so years of the sun.
Mhm.
So for an elf, that's actually not a super long time.
Yeah.
And what Tolkien says is during the war with Morgoth, the Eldar in general did not really marry or have children,
Yeah.
as just as kind of a rule, and that elves in general tend not to marry during wartime. So okay, that's fine. They didn't really marry, but at some point before the end of the first age, they come over the Blue Mountains into Eriador, and they do marry.
Yeah.
And that happens pretty early on in the second age, so that Tolkien works around the date, but somewhere between the year 50 in the second age and the year 300 in the second age, Galadriel A has at least one child,
Mhm.
and B is invited back to Valinor, not deported, but invited back to
Yeah.
Valinor, and she refuses
Mhm.
the invitation. And the reason she refuses the
And this is
invitation, that
important. The reason.
yeah, this is really important to me. The reason we're told that she refuses the invitation are twofold, and Tolkien repeats this 3 times. And it's in basically, with slight variations, it's in every single version. So we can look at this and say this is core to the character.
Mhm.
The reason she refuses the invitation is because A, she loves Celeborn, is unwilling to be parted from him, and he is unwilling to leave Middle Earth yet.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
there's reason number one. Reason number two is that she is now hoping she can get the thing which she left Valinor for to begin with, which is to
Mhm.
have a realm of her own.
Yeah.
So early on in the Second Age, Celeborn is actually a ruler of Harlingen, which is one of the fiefs of Lindon under Gil-galad. But then
Mhm.
they eventually leave. They move around a little bit. Tolkien revises and re-revises the places they move around to, but basically they're looking for a place to sort of set up shop and create a realm of their own.
Yeah.
And actually the realm of the Elven Smiths, Eregion, is actually in one of the versions they're the ones who founded that. But
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
the point is the reasons that Galadriel stays in Middle Earth, it's not because she's got this thirst for vengeance,
Yes.
right? This driving thirst for vengeance. It's
Yeah.
a more complex, and actually for Tolkien, a more dangerous motivation,
Oh
a
yeah. For
motivation
sure.
really
For
worth
sure.
exploring, which is
Okay. Yeah.
this desire for rule, and just sort of
But
like,
also desire for place. So
yes, and
it's a two-edged thing.
yes,
It's got a good root to it,
yes,
but it's
yeah,
been twisted. All right. But that's nuanced and complex. And
right.
I'm gonna get into this in a second. But you finish your thought.
So this is the so if you look at but one of the things in all of this that Tolkien says and that Christopher Tolkien says is that the history of Galadriel is the history of the Second Age.
Okay. There you
So
go.
in other words, she's the most important character, at least the first half of the Second Age. She's the most important character.
Yeah.
And Christopher Tolkien says this when he's kind of summarizing things in Unfinished Tales. And so to the point that really the only history that we have of most of the Second Age is actually just a history of Galadriel and Celeborn. And yeah, sure, it's fragmentary, or it's at least not fully fleshed out or whatever, but it's enough to know what did Tolkien sort of have in mind. And you can look at the variations and actually see that, yeah, he moves dates around a little bit, but it's a very stable picture of who Galadriel is. And the thing that she's defined by really is this love for Celeborn, which is tied for her to her love for Middle Earth, and this very complex, very nuanced. And when I say dangerous, I don't mean bad or wrong. I mean dangerous.
Yeah.
The way that Galadriel is dangerous.
Yes.
Right. The way that that Celeborn warns the Fellowship from going into Fangorn, and then later they're talking to Treebeard about this, and he says, "Well, I would have warned you from going into Lothlorien." And it's not that Treebeard and Celeborn don't like each other, but those are both inherently dangerous places for mortals to tread. Right.
That's right.
So it's dangerous in that sense. This love of place, this desire for a realm.
Yeah.
Right. And this sort of like to have a place that's mine and I'm rooted in it, which in a way is actually the original elf desire that you're supposed to have, but also because of the history of the Noldor, it's become a little perilous. And ultimately, it's the thing that Galadriel has to renounce. This is her sort of reverse enunciation moment with Frodo, right? Is to renounce glory.
It's not simply
and to pass into the West.
Ring. It's not simply renounce the One Ring. It's renounce
all of her hopes,
her vision of power, which is a vision of power over place, which is a motherly vision. And by the way, mothers who are denied or who have their children taken away are the most bloody, scary villains you can imagine.
Yes.
That is scary stuff. That is the kind of thing you can explore. And by the way, it is explored in some really interesting modern media. I don't know if you've watched this, Richard, but there's a show on HBO. It's called Raised by Wolves.
I haven't yet, but it's sort of on my list. I've been wanting to watch it, but I just haven't got to it yet.
There's some things that are not very good with it in terms of the writing, but what they get perfectly is they perfectly understand the danger of the devouring mother.
Yeah.
And how there is an incredible power in this. So I'm going to now go long into Galadriel, if you don't mind.
Let's do it. Because this is really important. Like a queen is a different thing from a king.
Yes. And a heroine is a different thing from a hero. Okay. Yeah. And so this is really unfortunate. I'm not saying this out of a hatred for the show. I'm not saying this because I don't like Galadriel. Even the character that we have here, I find her to be a little bit annoying, but it's not her fault. The whole setup for Galadriel in this show is problematic because it's a setup that's tailor-made for a hero. Now, I don't mean a male hero. I mean a hero in the archetypal sense of the hero's journey. So in the archetypal hero's journey, there is a call to action, some reason for the character to go out of home and to go out into the darkness and to battle the dragons and to find a thing, maybe even to follow things on the map. Although the idea of this following this sigil in the wastes of the north is one of the dumbest things anybody could have ever thought. I mean, it's puerile. It's like this is something a 6-year-old hardly could have made up. It's so stupid.
Unfortunately, it's worse than that. It's the sort of thing that or maybe not worse than that, but adjacent to that, it's the sort of thing that, like, if I was running a D&D campaign and I had players who I knew just couldn't handle like a deep mystery, like investigation, I would give them this, like, oh, you see this mysterious sigil, it pops up again and again. Whatever could it mean?
Especially when in episode 3 we realized it doesn't mean what we thought it meant, and all it took was you twisting the thing and it turns into something else. And lottie. Okay, so Scott just said it's the kind of thing J.J. Abrams said. Okay, these writers are from the J.J. Abrams coaching tree. The only
no kidding.
Yes, the only writing credit these guys have, the only official writing credit they have is as it's not even credited. They are uncredited writers on Star Trek Into Darkness, the second Star Trek movie, the worst Star Trek movie. Okay, these guys don't have credits. And by the way, this is why every single episode is a puzzle box, because that's what J.J. Abrams does.
Yeah.
And this is another problem, by the way, with the show. I'm not going to get into this. We can get into this in later episodes. The puzzle box thing doesn't work well for Tolkien. It's not about
No. No.
a puppet jumping out of a box and you're not expecting who it is. That's
Right.
not the way that Tolkien writes. It's silly. Anyway, getting back to the hero thing. So the hero's journey is, you can have a hero that's a woman, you can have a hero that's a man. It's sort of non-sex specific. It doesn't matter. The point is that the structure only really works when you have a character that has inner demons, right? It's something that needs to be worked out through a quest where the character goes outside of him or herself, defeats the dragons outside and the dragon inside, then it comes back home in order to transform the home. That's the entire point. It's not about killing beasts. It's about overcoming an internal dragon so that home can be transformed. There is no place for this archetypal journey in Galadriel, in the Galadriel of this moment. It makes no sense. First of all, she doesn't have a home. Second of all, there is no inciting incident. The only inciting incident they can think of, the only call to action they can think of, is the death of her brother. But the death of her brother is not even a hero's journey inciting moment. Heroes don't get called into battle by the death of their families. That's not how it works. That happens in heroines' journeys, and heroines' journeys have different structures. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, no, I think that this is part of why that, I mean, obviously, like, they deprived Finrod Filigund of his amazing death.
Yes.
Fighting werewolves.
Yes.
And instead gave him this kind of a bummer of a death. But what's weird about it is, like, that's not even the part about it that bothered me. What really bothered me is that they were trying to, I don't even, like, I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's just like, it didn't fit the plot. Like it just
doesn't
felt,
make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It felt like we got like two incompatible like archetypes trying to connect.
Right. And the two archetypes that are incompatible are revenge story and hero's journey. And they're not compatible. A revenge story cannot be a hero's journey, because the end of the revenge story is the hero, meaning the main character, coming up against the object of his revenge and realizing the futility of his desire to have revenge. That's the whole point of the Count of Monte Cristo, which is the ultimate revenge story. And there can be a transformation, but it's in spite of the journey, not because of it. All right. So you can have the two archetypes. It's clashing. It doesn't make sense. And it's very bizarre. And so because of that, she comes off as petty, because you have to constantly manufacture disasters for her to have to go through. And it's not fair for her, because she's not a bad actress. And she has a good sense of who Galadriel is in the larger sense. I get a sense that this person, if I'm looking at her, just looking at her, not considering her within these episodes, she could become the Galadriel of the movies. Definitely. I could see that she's putting all of her heart into this. But if they had considered, I don't even know if they know the difference between these archetypes, which they should, because this is like writing 101. Because if they had given her a heroine's journey, not because she's a woman, but because the heroine's journey is perfect for Galadriel in this sense, because the heroine's journey archetype is one in which you start with a family unit. She's married, she has a kid. Something happens to the family unit. Usually that family unit is also in a place. There's a death, an abduction, some kind of rape of some kind, and in the larger sense, not in the strictly anatomical,
the seizing sense. Yeah.
Yes, like in the myth of Demeter, right, which is the archetypal heroine's journey myth.
Right.
At which point the heroine goes out of her home, but she goes out in order to find help.
Right.
And it's in the finding of help that she finds a new family. And she's able to go into the underground, into the underworld, pass a bunch of tests, and then be reconciled with her family in a deeply rooted way that's connected to place. Which, judging by what Tolkien's vision for Galadriel is, this would have been the perfect and extremely compelling thing to do, because there are not a lot of heroines' journeys out there, and they're not done very well, but they could be. And it's an impoverishment of modern storytelling that insists that all female heroic characters need to have a male heroic arc. It doesn't make sense. Not every woman is Wonder Woman. Not every woman is an Amazon. In this case, it would have been such a rich and wonderful exploration of what it means to be an elf with a realm in a place, even if she didn't have that realm yet, just being in a place and desiring to have control over it and then losing it. Imagine the danger in that character. And they're trying to do that by suggesting that there's this deep darkness inside of her. And I kind of appreciate the attempt, because I understand what they're trying to do. How many times have we said this already in this episode? I understand what they're trying to do, because having a conflicted Galadriel that might actually bring about the coming of Sauron because of her lack of care is a compelling idea. It's a super interesting idea. but not if she is the hero that goes out and pokes dragons, because that impoverishes her as a character. It removes a very powerful potential motivation of her being a mother figure that has been scorned. And there's this fear of motherhood. There's this fear of femininity. There's this fear of archetypal womanhood that we see everywhere, that just keeps asserting itself again and again and again. And in a story like this one, that's attempting very earnestly and sincerely to try to reestablish some kind of traditional order in storytelling, it's really trying hard, but it's also trying to please everybody. They're trying to please the whole universe, and it's not working for anybody. I mean, the diverse casting isn't diverse enough. The heroic, shenanigans of Galadriel aren't heroic enough. It's all of it's not enough, because they're trying to please everybody and it just won't work.
The pettiness of the character is something that really did strike me a lot in this episode. Like, can you actually imagine a scenario in which Galadriel from the books goes to Numenor, and let's say she did, and like threatens Elendil with a knife?
I mean, come on.
Like,
and the scene in the throne room was, come on, you're an elf, you've lived for thousands of years. Do you really have that short of a fuse and that much of inability to have a normal conversation with somebody in power? Are you what?
1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry,
we passed our time.
No, it's okay. I was talking to my wife. It's fine. So this is the thing. Like, she had a lot of pettiness, and there's also this reoccurring thing that the writers do with her. Every time she learns a new piece of information, she says, so it's like, as soon as she finds out, like, Halbrand is from, the South or whatever, she's
that he's the king of the South.
Or no, like, this is like in episode 2 or something. She's like, oh, where is your home? Right. And then later on, they're at the lore, when she finds out that Elendil like has a lore, like a library right back at his home. She says,
where the faithful are.
Yeah, she says, where is your lore house or whatever, and it's like every time she learns a new piece of information, she's like, I have to get there right now. And you're standing in my way, and you don't understand how important my job is. Right. And it comes across as extremely petty. Which is it's unfortunate, because it's unfair to the actress and it's unfair to the character.
Totally.
Right.
The character as written in this show, not the character as imagined by us in an idealized version.
Right. Yeah. Like, it's just kind of like, it's unfair. It makes her come across as really petty. And I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make her seem like direct and focused and like a woman on a mission kind of a thing. But we're just, the sigil that, like, conveniently is like, it looks like the Eye of Sauron, but also sort of a map of Mordor if you squint. I was like, come on. I
mean, that's classic puzzle box stuff, and it drives me up a lot. But we'll talk about puzzle boxes in future episodes. Okay, we're going long. I want to give some time for the Q&A afterwards.
Sure.
Let's end here with your hopes, your thoughts about where we are and where we're going to go.
Okay, so my hopes would be that we can something we didn't address is the bedroom eyes with Halbrand and Galadriel that we seem to be sort of stuck in right now.
I don't like it.
I really don't like this. I don't like it for lots and lots of reasons. And again, it feels like somebody was like, well, the Jackson trilogy had like an elf chick and a human man, and they were really into each other, and he was the king, the lost king of a people. And so what if we just did that again? And I don't know if that's the direction they're going or not, but
I don't think so. For the record, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either,
but to throw us off.
But I think it's just, I mean, this goes back to the fact in general that Galadriel is single, which really bothers me, because it seems like they're just using it as, this is a very convenient thing for storytelling, because we can just like hint at romantic tension between these different characters. So what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see the introduction of Celeborn as a character. If they're going to go this quest for vengeance, right, this sort of bloodthirsty Galadriel, then she'll need something to kind of like tone her down and actually sort of bring like a healing presence into her life.
Yes, that could be Celeborn.
And that could be Celeborn. So I think that would be a nice way to go.
I agree.
Like we talked about earlier, quite interested to see where we go with the stranger, which is a very puzzle box kind of a thing. It's got this constellation he's trying to track down, all this stuff. But for all that, I think I'm still pretty interested in that story.
Me too.
I would really like to I would really like to see a little more done with the dwarves in a way that is
Oh yeah.
actually we have some chances for some really compelling world building here.
Yeah.
And so far we've only gotten a very little bit, but
Yeah.
so
It
far it
hasn't
was
been very
like
good.
the crew of the Enterprise touches down on an M-class planet, and
Yes.
there are short Klingons there. Like that's what this is kind of what we got so far. So I would
Yeah.
really like to see I'd really like to see more done with the dwarves. Obviously, they hint at the end of the second episode that the dwarves have discovered Mithril in Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
So they're going to run that plot parallel to the stuff that's going on with Rings of Power, which timing might be like a little off for that, but I'm into it. Like let's see where
You
that
mean
goes.
like them opening up the doorway to the Balrog sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested in where they might go there. So
Yeah.
um yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. I still hope good things for the show. It's not so late in the show that they couldn't sort of turn Galadriel's character arc around.
Yeah.
I was very concerned about I rewatched the first episode yesterday to kind of get my thoughts together on it for
Mhm.
this conversation. And uh again, that moment with Finrod, when Finrod, she's, how do I know which light is
Yeah. Yeah.
real?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Finrod whispers the answer to her. Audience doesn't get it. And the point is that when we get this reveal at the end of the first episode, that's supposed to be really significant.
Yeah.
Um, but the actual message of it, I think, is the most subversive thing in the show so far to
Yeah.
Tolkien's actual
Yes.
ethos. And
Yes.
can I say one more thing, just
Yes.
real quick, and then we'll do Q&A. Um, the very first line of the show is quite
Mhm.
interesting to me. Nothing
Okay.
is evil in the beginning.
Yes.
Nothing's evil in the beginning. Now, this is a line from Tolkien.
Hmm.
Um, but the place that we find it in Tolkien actually comes in a place that maybe most people would not expect. And it's actually in the Council of Elrond, and it's originally Elrond's line,
Mm.
which is
Interesting.
fine.
Yeah.
But they did a similar thing with Treebeard's lines, gave them to Galadriel at the start of the
Yeah.
Jackson trilogy.
Which was
But
effective.
which was very effective. Like, still one of the most effective. Like, let me do a quick
Oh yeah.
exposition dump.
Oh no.
Like
I mean
in cinema history, like it's
that's
like
amazing.
textbook. This is how
Yeah.
you do a good
This
one.
is how you
Yeah,
do it. Yeah.
yeah. But she gives this line from Elrond, but in when Elrond is actually uh, uh sorry, when oh
Your sounds
it's
up.
my yeah, it was my son at the door. So when Elrond actually gives this line in the Council of Elrond, what he says is it's in response to Boromir's suggestion that they take the ring and use it against Sauron.
Mm.
And he says, I'm not willing to do that. None of the wise are. Why? Because nothing is evil in the beginning, but
Mhm.
eventually the things that we use the ring on, all of this would be twisted to evil, etc., etc. The
Yeah.
point of the line, nothing is evil in the beginning, is actually about how easy it is to be corrupted by the desire for power.
Which is
Um,
problematic with reference to Galadriel. Very seriously problematic.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if they chose that line intentionally and they're
I,
going
I don't
to
I don't think they're thinking through that well. And
yeah,
somebody mentioned, was it you or Father Andrew mentioned that they just thought that in order to understand what the light is, you have to touch the darkness. It just sounded cool.
that was me, and I was really trying to give them some credit there, because like
Yeah.
if we take that line seriously, it's extremely subversive. It's
It's not
anti-Tolkien.
Tolkien.
Yeah.
It's Martin. It's
Yeah,
Martin.
right. And so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt there. But like, thinking about this, nothing's evil in the beginning. Actually, I think where that line comes from might almost be the exact opposite
Yeah.
of the point that they're trying to make with this character. And so that's something to watch out for. But again, it's early in the show. They've got
Yeah.
4 more seasons to go. Maybe they'll turn it around.
Yeah, I got the sense that the first two episodes were overwritten, like they were, because they knew they were going to be screening them, and there
Yes.
was a lot was going to be riding on them.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you put too much attention and effort on beginnings of things. You tend to get a little bit too explainy. You tend to get a little bit too on the
Yeah.
nose. You start to forget about the rules of good writing. This happens to any writer who over edits his work or allows an editor to get too in depth with his or her work. And I think that's what happened here, because I gotta, except for the stupid rituals in episode 3, I really felt a lot more rooted in the world. I felt like the writers were more confident and more comfortable being where they were, and that they liked to tell the story that they were telling. And that was compelling to me. And that was interesting to me.
Episode
So
3 was definitely a lot less uneven.
yes, no, and in
Yeah.
terms of tone as well. And,
Yeah.
the unevenness of the tone in the first 2 episodes is a real problem. And I think I might want to talk about that in a future episode.
Mm.
How I would have liked to see the story play out, which would have avoided the multiple point of view technique at the very beginning, would have allowed it to happen later, which is what Tolkien does in Lord of the Rings. He starts with a single point of view and then he expands it out, which is a much more natural way of entering into a world that doesn't require you to explain everything to the audience, because the audience sees everything through the eyes of characters who are learning things from the beginning. Excuse me. So I don't want to be negative at the end. I'm very interested and excited to see where this goes. I'm very intrigued by the idea of this dark elf in Mordor.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I think this is going to be some very good bit of world building. The whole Mordor thing, I think, is brilliant. I really like it.
The thing that I find myself so surprised by is that's the part of the show that I'm the most interested in. I'm like,
yeah, well, there you go. If you don't
me
have any
more of that.
expectations,
Yeah.
well, if
Yeah.
you don't have any
Well,
expectations, then you feel freer. And there's so much writing on this thing for Amazon that you expect them to be a little bit stilted in the stuff that's directly connected to the lore. If they can get past the temptation of the puzzle box and just allow the story to happen, that's going to be helpful. I think they might do that after season 1, because by that point we'll have a sense of who actually wants to watch this. I mean, we've all watched season 1 of the original series of not the original series, of the Next Generation, which is tonally a disaster. Everybody knows this. The first season of Next Generation was horrible.
Right. Yes.
It was only like by season 3 that they really got their got their feet under them, and those characters that we know and love started to show up. So I'm willing to give the show as much time as it needs. Clearly, this thing is going to go for as long as it needs. And I have to say that I really don't like the attempts to take it down by many people who just clearly have not seen it, or who have seen it and have not seen it with open eyes, but with extremely and because the main reason, and I talked about this with Jonathan in a Peugeot, in an episode that we just recorded, it's because for these people this is the religion of their life, and that's a really sad thing. So
100%.
Yeah. Well, let's so that'll be it for this episode for Fantasy for Our Time. We're going to stop the live stream here, and we're going to continue the Q&A. It's not going to be on the actual podcast.